you mentioned something about Mormons just recently, and that their Jesus is different than something to that effect. And I was wondering what you meant by that.
Yeah. Now, is there a reason you're asking, Jenny? Are you a Mormon, or do you know Mormons?
I used to. Well, I grew up Mormon. I was born and raised Mormon. I'm 56. I've been out of the church for decades. But my understanding growing up was that, Jesus was the Son of God with Mary as his mother, and he was a teacher and a healer and, just the basic things that you learn about Jesus. Mm-hmm. And so it kind of made me curious as to why you thought a Mormon Jesus was different than a traditional Jesus.
Okay. Bobby?
And that's a common experience for people who are in the Mormon church. It's in a lot of ways, it's kind of like the moderate Muslim who will contend that this is what Islam believes, yet we know that there is a lot of radical statements, like, for example, in Surah 9 about, what to do to the infidel, and verses like that, where you'll have moderate Muslims going, I don't think that the Quran teaches and the Hadith teaches that Muhammad was a bad person. And so they're often confused by the character of Muhammad when they really start digging into their own sources. And I think in some ways that there will be people who are a part of the Mormon church, and they might have got some basic discipleship, but when you dig in and look into it a little bit more and you start going, wow, they believe that Jesus had three wives, Mary Magdalene, and Martha, that Jesus was the spirit brother of Lucifer, that Elohim, God, was physical flesh and bones, so that God was a flesh and bones entity. So these are some real radical differences into who Jesus is. And so we don't believe that Jesus was the spirit brother of Lucifer. We don't believe that Jesus was married. We don't believe that Jesus has Elohim as a father who was physical in nature. And so these become problematic. And so some of the stuff that you can do is it's looking in, like you got the Doctrines and Covenants, the Prologue of Great Christ, the Book of Mormon. The Mormons will read the King James Version, but then there's also like just different pamphlets and stuff that were put out. And in looking into the teachers of some of the founders and the presidents throughout the Mormon history, and you start looking into that, and that's where some of the stuff's revealed. So for an example, one cult expert is Ron Rhodes, and he's written Reasoning from the Scriptures with Mormons. If you get that book, he will give you some real key examples of what I'm talking about, and he will also give you the exact sources that will show you where to find the discussion on the type of things that I'm bringing up in this moment.
Let me throw something else out to you. The real question I think you're asking is, okay, so there are some differences, but do these differences matter? And that's really the issue. I mean, you might say, well, I believe some things about Jesus and you believe other things about Jesus, but do these things I believe, or that the Mormon Church believes, disqualify them in some way or distinguish them in some way from Christians, historic Christians? And I think if you asked them, they would say yes. There are differences. Now, I get it that if you're looking at 2020 right now, the Mormon Church has really moved a large part toward Christianity, and I think really it started when Mormons started running for office. The idea that this is something other than Christianity made it difficult to get elected outside of Utah. So the question became, well, how similar is Mormonism? Is this another denomination of Christianity? But if that was the case, ask the question to your Mormon friends: are Christians Mormon? Forget about are Mormons Christian. Are Christians Mormon? Because if it's an equivocal relationship, like are Baptists and Presbyterians both Christians? Are Baptists and Methodists both Christians? And if it's a denominational difference, then you'd have to say, well, that there's no point in sending Mormon missionaries door to door, because everyone you would encounter who's a Christian is already a Mormon. But of course, they do see a distinction, and they aren't the same. And Joseph himself, Joseph Smith, said that he's here to reform a church, restore a church that was lost in the great apostasy, because they believed that after the apostles died, the plain and precious truths of the gospel were lost, and they need to be restored. And so, I think from the perspective of Mormons, would there be such an intense missionary program in place if they thought that all Christians were already Mormon? No. And most people who become Mormons are Christians who convert to Mormonism at the door. So I think this is part of the question I would ask, number one. Number two, every term we definitely use the same terms. We use the word Jesus and God the Father and salvation and grace and heaven. And our definitions are entirely different. And I think a lot of the Mormons I talk to don't even realize that those definitions are so dramatically different. Like, for example, under Mormonism, Jesus is by nature a man who was exalted to godhood through his good works, but was born as a man, just like you and I. And you and I have the ability to also take the same exact position that Jesus has in a different world, because we can be exalted to God's status in celestial kingdom through our good works of being baptized in the church, being married in the church. These are things we can do. But by nature, Jesus is different. Under Christianity, Jesus is the eternal Word in John 1, who by his nature is divine, not human, who then later exalted into godhood, but is by his very nature divine. That's a very different kind of being. And so we can use the same word. But if you said, okay, you're married to him, your husband's John, but you, and somebody else says, well, they've redefined, you know John to be a good man. But somebody else says, I know John, and he's not a good man. What's your definition of who John is matters. And you would say to that person, well, you might know somebody named John, but you don't know my John, because he is not by definition that person. And that's what's happening here, is we can say, yeah, we have the same words, but they are defined very differently. So when I say that for the idea of grace, grace is a great example of this, because this is what defines Christianity, distinguishes it from all other religious worldviews, right? Every other religious worldview requires you to do something to earn your salvation. And Christianity, it's the one anomaly. This is why I love it, because think about it. In my cases, every guy who's not the killer, they all have something in common. They're not the killer. The one guy who is the killer uniquely stands out from the rest. That's how I know he's the right guy. And the same thing happens in Christianity. Of all the worldviews, only one offers you this, and there's nothing you can do to earn your way. So when I say, I believe, for example, I'm talking to a Mormon friend today in 2020, and I said, hey, I believe it's by grace you are saved. They would say, yes, we agree. No, what I mean is, I believe that you can do nothing, that Jesus does it all. They would say, yes, we agree. I'm like, well, we're talking around each other. Because this is the difference. We would say that if we're on earth and we are going to be taken to heaven, that we can do nothing to get there, that God has to drop a lifeline to us. And we don't even have the ability to climb the rope. Now, what grace is to Mormons is that Jesus comes and he puts a ladder on the first surface of the planet. And so you could say truly that I could not go to heaven without Jesus. It's all Jesus, because without the ladder, you can't climb it. But you have to climb it. You have to climb it on your own. And that's a very different version of grace. As a ladder, we think it's a rope that he drops down to us, and we're fighting against him the whole way. He has to tie it on and drag us up against our will. That's what grace is. Grace is, I will do all of it. I'm not just going to give you the mechanism by which you can earn it. I'm going to do all of it. And that's the distinction between Mormon grace and Christian grace. These things matter. I can say I love the person of Jesus that I've imagined in my mind, or I love the person of Jesus who's something other. Like I love the husband named John I'm married to who really isn't that person. But in the end, don't we want to be in the truth? And so when we say we love Jesus and we are following the teaching of Jesus, it's not the Jesus of someone's imagination. That it's instead the historic Jesus who really did live, who really did die on the cross, and these are historic claims of Christianity, and that no one's opinion matters. What matters is, what does the Scripture, what do the eyewitnesses teach about Jesus? That's the Jesus that I want to follow. And that's why I think definitions matter.
Yeah. So in Christianity, God throws down the rope. We grab onto the rope, and then he pulls the rope up.
Right.
Well,
and sometimes we're not even grabbing. He's got to descend down the rope, tie it on while we're kicking and screaming, and then just drag us up anyway.
Yeah.
That's how lame we are and how incapable we are of even climbing the rope.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the difference.
Yeah.
And so what we would say under Mormon, what Mormons would say is that, yes, grace is what God does. He gives you the ladder, the ability to work your way to exaltation. Mm-hmm. And without God giving you that ladder, you aren't going anywhere.
Yeah.
But still, you got to climb the ladder.
And it's a ladder with 10 million rungs.
Oh, absolutely. That's right. And so that's the difference. And this does matter, right? Because you will see the level of depression amongst people who are in works-based systems. Just give you an example. Ask your Mormon friends, what's going to happen when you die? Will you be in heaven when you die? The vast majority will say, well, I hope so. I hope. They don't know where they are on the ladder. But if you ask your Christian friends, where do you go when you die? I'm going to be in heaven. Why? Because they know that it's not about ladder climbing. So that's that, and that is really the difference. You can know now that you are saved under Christianity. You cannot know that under any other religious worldview.
That's right.
And that is a defining distinction. And if you can't say that, you say I'm a Jesus follower, but I can't say that. Well, you've got some problem with the historic claims of Christianity, and that's why we have these things called creeds. We can argue about what should be in a creed, but creeds are helpful in the sense that they kind of lock down what are the essential beliefs that Christianity teaches, and if for no other reason, they're helpful to compare to other worldviews.